Cool. So I want to talk to you a bit about the journey I've been into and an area that I think is very exciting on GenAI. So I'll walk you through the thinking. I'm going to fly through a bunch of these. I have a bit of content, and then there's some areas that you'll see at the end. I'm still adding content. So this again is I'm DevOpsing this talk, right? So again, it's a big deal, right? I don't have to tell you, like you and your team should be focusing on it, right? And it will bring a lot of change, right? You know, I think we hear the chasm at the moment in a weird way. I think there's a lot of early adopters, but we also have an interesting backlash against it, which I think is an interesting fly. So we definitely passed the bit. And again, I was the CISO that was to go to InfoSec and say, anybody who speaks about AI to me, I'm walking straight away out, because up until about a year ago, very few people were doing it. They were doing ML at best, right? But I think ChatGPT definitely broke a level. It's the first time that I feel there's an interactivity, there's an understanding there. And the more I do it, the better it becomes, right? So again, right, you know, it's not a silver bullet. If you want to buy silver bullets, there's a lot of people that buy silver bullets, spend a lot of money in technology. There's a lot of people that will sell a lot of stuff, right? It's not about that, right? And, you know, again, you know, it's not about using GenAI for everything, right? There's a lot of stuff you can do. There's the things that doesn't work, etc., right? So the thing I added is that there's actually an interesting thing that's happening. There's a lot of people, a lot of companies that I thought knew best, and they starting to, you know, talk, you know, in a way they're putting AI down. And of course, there's a lot of hype, right, with all these things. But there's a great quote, a friend of mine used to say that it's very difficult to get a man to understand, or a person, right, to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding it, right? So you can look at this and going, well, that sucks, right, because it's misspelled, there's a lot of things in here. Or you can look and say, that was created as, you know, it cost 10p or 1p to cost, and that's the state of the technology today, and we know it's going to get better. And by the way, if you look at the stuff that Adobe is doing, it's pretty insane, right? But I think we had an interesting point here, right? Now, there's two things in the last 10 years, and I've been doing this for a while, right, that really impressed me. One is worldly mapping. So some of you guys know worldly maps, especially the people that work with me or been around, some of the stuff I do. It's insane, right? Like that was the best thing I've learned for a while. GenAI, I think, kind of tops that a little bit. But again, if you take one thing out of this talk, go and check worldly maps, right? And these are examples of worldly maps. And worldly maps is not just the map, which is here. It's also how you think about how you structure teams. Again, we talk about, you know, somebody who lands a new system. You need to understand what you build, what you buy, what you commoditize, what you do, and the movement of things, right? And then you have doctrines and gameplays, which is really cool, right? So this is a map that I helped to create. There's a bunch of people doing cybersecurity maps, really cool. This map shows what's going to happen, right? So this is kind of how you map. You create a map. This depends on that, etc. So what you have here is that all of these today, the security LLMs are very immature. So they are Genesis, custom build, product, and commodity, right? So that's how things move that way. So you can argue that bug bounty today is almost a commodity, right? It's just a service that you buy, where probably cybersecurity expertise is very Genesis still, right? We're still doing a lot of stuff. And the good thing of a map, you can challenge it. You can now talk about it. You can say where you are, etc. What's really cool about this is that dot there of LLMs, which again runs on top of cloud infrastructure, up until a year ago was here. Right? They were not very easy to use. There was no APIs, etc. Right? What ChatGPT did very cleverly, and by the way, it's insane how the others haven't copied, right? Because OpenAI is giving a freaking masterclass up until last week, right, of how to execute things, right? But they, basically they came along and they productized, borderline commoditized this. And what it means that where here the LLMs were really struggling to gain, now you have this massive force pushing this. So again, if you're a vendor, if you're a team that has stuff in this, you have two choices. Either you compete here, right, and you start building this, or you assume that this is going to move forward and you're going to compete in what actually you know your domain. But if you don't do that, and if you don't leverage the LLMs and security LLMs that are coming your way, you're going to be made redundant in a way that I don't think we've seen in our industry, right? Because again, I was talking to some vendors that say, look, a lot of vendors play the game to say the cost of move is what keeps you there, because the cost of going to a competitor, maybe you get 10, 20% better, but you have a lot of cost to move. That doesn't work when you get 100%. Right, benefit, or 200%. It's like everybody knows the joke of the bear, right? You don't have to run faster than you. The person is just, you need to, so you don't have to run faster than the bear, you just run faster than the person next to you. It's great. That doesn't work with sharks, right? Because sharks don't move 10% faster than you, they move 200% faster or 500% faster than everybody else. So the shark can go around, sniff everybody, and then pick the prey, right? So that's a different game, right? So fundamentally, you need to look at it, right? So again, there's a great introduction, Worldly Maps. I'm involved in this Open Security Summit, right? There's some great presentations there, right? Now, I think everybody's going to be impacted. And basically, the way I look at it is, right, you either should be very excited, in fact, you should be very excited and you should be panicking, right, at the same time. A lot of people are ignoring, right, which is really fascinating, right? They're like, this is all fine. We have time. I'm like, you don't have time, right? Because this is about like the internet coming along going, yeah, we'll figure out how to use it, right? Or the cloud, right? You don't have a lot of time. So you should be here because you can take a lot of stuff, and you should be panicking because it's really going to cause a lot of disruption, right? And this is the thing that I feel is very important to take into account, right? Here are the companies that panic in the last 2 years, right? And they're not small players, right? You have Microsoft, AWS, Google, McKinsey, right? And when I say panic, it means that they saw it and they understood what it meant. They understood that GenAI, actually, Adobe, actually, sorry. and Adobe is actually a good example of a company that also, by panic, I'm saying that they took it very serious at a very big level. Because, for example, here are some of the companies that did not panic in the past. And by the way, I need to improve the slides, but you get the point, right? The iPhone, you have Samsung, BlackBerry, Nokia, Microsoft laughing at the iPhone, going, what's this, right? BlackBerry, we got our keys, right? It's all cool, right? So, the cloud is just somebody else's computer, right? Don't have to care about it. Even the mobile, who would think that, Apple will be the winner, right? In the mobile phone, right? And even Nokia, right? A lot of those things where you had massive companies. And of course, you got Blockbuster, HMV, Kodak, Polaroid, Commodore Amiga, tells me my age, right? Still the best computer ever, right? Sears, Borders, MySpace, Yahoo, they're all companies. They should have panicked. They should have changed their corporate strategy. They didn't, right? So that's what happened to them, right? Now, one of the things that ChatGPT introduced recently, which is really cool, is the multimodal thing. So you can now give it an image. So as an example, that slide looked like this, right? And I was like, actually, I need some more companies. So this is my prompt, right? I said, I literally copy and pasted. Like, it's really cool. It supports paste now from clipboard. So I literally went select, copy, paste. And I said, hey, in a slide attack, panic, how many companies do this? Can you review the names and give him some stuff? Bang, right? Think about how productivity that was. And I'm going to come back to this. I still own every one of the results I put in there, but this helped me, to be dramatically more productive. So if you think about the time that would have taken me to go from this slide to that slide, it would have taken me, half an hour, lots of thinking, lots of brainstorming, lots of Googling, right? All that stuff. I've done that literally in 5 minutes, right? And that makes a massive difference, right? And so this is a bit controversial, but I think the cybersecurity industry, right, is a massive part of the problem, right? Even taking, not even adding to the fact that most cybersecurity products are selling insecure, right? Which is, a massive, basically oxymoron, right? Because they're a startup, right? They're trying to get market share, right? Security, we'll do that later, right? So most of our industry lives on the fringe of inefficiencies, right? So we got stuff like this, right? Like you have all these things, you have all these vendors, all this stuff, right? All of it's broken, right? And I think that's going to dramatically change, and we should be driving it. Now, it's not about a Terminator, right? There's a time for this. There's conversation about this, but this is not what we're talking about. This would always going to happen anyway, right? It's like nuclear weapons, right? We will need to control, sentient stuff. And the idea that we build things that we don't control, that are way more intelligent than us, you don't need movies to understand how that will end up, right? So I think we need to have some rules of engagement there and understand how that operates. But and then the people that want to fire things, they would always fire people, right? That's not the thing. And of course, stupid people would do stupid things, right? If you play around with water, with electricity, you deserve it, right? If you are a lawyer and you go to ChatGPT and you ask for cases and you don't even check that the cases exist, then again, you deserve what happens to you, right? But that's not what we're talking about, right? In fact, I was talking to the guy from Adobe, right? This is the image that made me really stop and think, right? And ironic is not on text, it was a visual one, but this is the image that I'll walk you through my chain of thinking because I think it was a massive paradigm shift. So what you have in the middle is the original, right? Painting. What you have on the outside is basically Firefly, basically extension of that picture in context. Now what you want to think about is how is this possible? So this is possible because the generative part, which is the key, creates an intermediate representation of reality that is in a way is kind of air-gapped between the input and the output. And that generative is what we became really, really, really good. So when we say, can you extend that line, you have to imagine all these layers in the middle that now understand design and stroke and volume and colors and structure and all these things, so that it is able to understand even a city, what it looks like. So all these touch points exist in there. And the key part here is that the cost of creating that was the cost of the artist. If you ask another artist to do this, you will have a cost of X, right? But if you go to the artist and say, hey, by the way, I don't like that. Can you move the sun a bit to the left? Can you change this? A normal person, if they did that, there would be another X because they had to do the painting again. The cost of doing this in GenAI is 1 cent, right? Or less than that. And the cost of creating another one is cheap as chips. And also, more importantly, you can modify the behavior and it goes there. So this is basically means that what we want to operate now is we want to operate at this level where we seed the model and we think about the prompt that we give to create that. And that's the pattern, right? And I'll come back to this over and over. As you can see here, right? You got Mona Lisa that goes there. You got Nirvana with a shark. I don't want a shark, take a shark, right? That becomes a prompt. Oh, you want to do something fun with a cover of Metallica, put it on a cake, right? But the power of this is that every one of these was very cheap to make. So what you now think about is almost art directing or defining the rules of engagement. And that's, again, a massive game change. So for me, this was the moment where I realized this is not your average ML, right? And then you apply that to text and it starts to make a lot more sense, right? So the key concept here is input, intermediate representation, output. That's how I look at it, right? That's the gen bit. That's the bit that's interesting. It's not about this. Input, intermediate representation, solution, action. Because by the way, we still don't know how this works completely, right? So you have to think about this, right? Like, this is not just a bit of code that the developer left, and nobody knows, but at least we still have the source code, right? We still don't fundamentally understand how ChatGPT works. We know the concepts, but we don't still fully understand all the layers that exist on it, right? So again, the idea that you connect an input to the output, especially when the input can affect this intermediate environment and the output, is borderline insane, right? Like, it's like I said, we went from raw SQL to kind of concatenating strings in SQL to maybe some parameterized queries to actually something really cool, which is link, which is object, and then we went all the way back to raw text that actually, technically, you can imagine the next level of exploits that from a prompt you start to manipulate the models itself, right? So what you really want is this. You want an input, you want an intermediate representation, which is the gen bit in the middle. You want a proposed solution. You want a GenAI verification. And this is the key concept. You want a human ownership of an answer, right? That is the most important thing here. This is about augmenting the human in the loop. It's about making them 10x more productive. That's the whole point. Anything else is just a sideshow. Right? I'm sure there's a couple of use cases, but I still think that we need to govern that a lot more outside of it. For me, the interesting use cases is when you use GenAI and these new technology stacks and these bots to augment the human in a loop, right? And that means that, we were talking over lunch, right? If you go to a dev team and you say, hey, I want I want up-to-date documentation, technical diagrams, I want every, 100% unit text coverage, I want integration tests, normal tests. Actually, by the way, I want a P&L because I want to map this, I want the risk mappings. You can see the developers going, F off, right? Like, we're never going to do none of that, right? But imagine now bots that do that. Imagine a dev team that now has bots that does every single one of those things, right? And then you enforce the standards on those bots. That's not possible. So the quality bar that we can have and the security that we can have is absolutely insane, which is awesome, right? So basically, the model, right, is not this, users, GenAI output, but this, users, GenAI, human ownership, output of users, output, data, etc. Right? That's the model. So, because the key of this is that what allows us to do is tackle issues that before were just far too complex, right? And again, half of our security industry lives around that space, right? And even technology, I would argue that there's a lot of stuff that we don't understand. That's why it becomes there. So OpenAI, I have changed the last slide, but OpenAI, by the way, is giving a masterclass on how to execute, right? And the reason why they're doing is because they're doing this pattern. If you're going to Worldly Maps, the cool thing is when you're going to gameplay. And one of the gameplays that you do is this thing called innovate, leverage, and commoditize. If you understand this, you understand what OpenAI is doing. In fact, you understand what AWS has been doing for the last 10 years, right? And why they're winning so much. So this is absolutely critical. So what this means, it means that the way you really want to operate is that you want to commoditize something, you as an industry, so you can commoditize one thing, right? That's what you're good at, right? Then what you do is you let your community to innovate on top of it. So you don't innovate in that real sense of figuring out the next thing. You just let your community do it for you. And they will, right? Because they're using your product. And then you harvest that, and then you leverage it, and you commoditize it again, right? And then you do that over and over again. So AWS comes on and does EC2. Hey, we commoditize EC2. A lot of people start to build MySQL database on top of it. AWS comes along and going, oh, cool, we're just going to create Aurora. Here's now a commoditized SQL database. A lot of people trying to do that. Oh, here's a serverless Aurora, and bang, and over. No, so if you look at every single AWS product that they release, it's all connected to somebody trying to use that thing in their platform, and they're going, we can commoditize that, right? And that's how you want to operate. So you don't need to think what people want to do and what they should be developing. What you do is you commoditize something, you make it easy to innovate, you make it easy to use, and then you leverage on top, right? So, and then there's all sorts of doctrines here. So you provide this, you harvest the ecosystem, etc. And then this also explains why a lot of people get stuck because, for example, past success breeds inertia. So there's a lot of companies that should know better. They should be commoditizing what they do, but they can't because they're successful until somebody comes along, and then they still argue about the quality of this where the new value moves along and eventually become redundant, right? So again, absolutely worth looking at it. So there was a moment in time when AWS did this that you had to pay attention. I would argue that now is OpenAI again until last week, right? But this is when your roadmap needs to change. And the reason your roadmap needs to change is because what was introduced was so fundamental and paradigm shifts that if you don't, because you basically means that you are reinventing the wheel on top of this, right? So for example, 128K of context is massive, right? I don't think we haven't even grasped what the power of that. That means you can drop your entire GRC documents on it. You can drop annual reports. You can drop all sorts of stuff within the context. And it costs £1 to run, right? Or 50p. Right? That's insane. You can say, here's my GRC graph. Here's my risks. Here's the threats I'm worried about. Here's this data. Here's my feed for my network. Here's my vulnerabilities, right? What should I care about? Right? That's now possible because of the context. Right? So it's absolutely insane, right? What we can do with this. GPT, so if you guys haven't seen it, this is a perfect example of ILC. Create an agent is very easy. All you have to do is create a prompt. And then you have an agent. So guess what OpenAI just literally did? Make it super easy to create GPTs. There's now hundreds of those just in cybersecurity. You want one for code review, one for risk assessment, one for threat modeling. But it's still a prompt. It's still early days, but it's a great example of them commoditizing that, right? And again, they're going to put a store, which you think the app stores should be doing that, but guess they are too successful. They have inertia, right? So these guys are going to eat their lunch, right? And again, assisting API, they're now also solving a lot of the indexing problem and a lot of the kind of the state problem, etc. Right? But again, what the hell happened there, right? Like it's still, it's just ridiculous, right? Although it's interesting because if he ends up in Microsoft, right, then he actually controls OpenAI. So that's an interesting twist of fate, right? Okay. So back to the topic. How do you make the team 10x more productive, right? Which I think, for the team that really embrace this, they're going to be happy, empowered, and fulfilled, and they're going to have massive career progression. So I measure the success of my team by how much we have to increase their salary every year, right? Because if you're doing your job right, your team should be growing 10 to 20% salary in your company, and outside the company should be growing 30 to 40%. Because you're giving them that level of expertise. You're giving that level of skill. And that's what you should be doing to your employees, making them better, improving them, teaching them, valuing them, etc. Right? So, we need to scale this thing, right? And this is basically just a small example of all the stuff I care about. In the past, I did all these services, but I could never scale, which now I can, right? So, here's the model that we are using for creating a 10x employee, right? So this is the logic, right? The logic is that there they are, our employee team, right? Which are, by the way, are highly trusted. They have access to a lot of resources. We have all sorts of controls in place, right, for our employees, right? And they should be the ones that really pass the keeper test. I don't know if you know from Netflix, right? The keeper test it's quite brutal, actually. It's basically saying, if you said you're resigning, would I fight for you, right? And then measure how long it takes to answer that, right? And if you have that 5-second pause going, yeah, maybe I will. Then you know the answer already, right? Where I know you have people in your team that if they left, you would fight for them, right? Absolutely, right? That's the keeper test, right? I mean, that's the people you want, right? You want people that love being at work, that you value, and they having a great thing, right? So they should be supported by security champions, which is the best way to scale, right? Actually, we have a program of security ambassadors, which is the evolution of this, but security champions is the best way to scale security because they are your network within the business. You have a bunch of bots, right? Now, multiple bots that augment the work. And we use Upwork. There's other freelance networks, but I use Upwork quite a lot to provide you on-demand freelance network that you can scale up. And what we're actually doing is we're now putting an air gap between this and the assets. So we're saying any work here cannot have any confidential data. It has to be fully air-gapped, which actually has a lot of great engineering requirements for it. So that's how it works, right? So I want to quickly couple topics in the last couple of minutes I have, right? So we actually one of the early, I think actually was on the keynote you guys talked about, I think we can, with the GenAI, just areas of productivity, we can stop subjective assessments because a lot of scaling human assessments actually doesn't scale very well because there's a lot of bias. We can address that. I think we can enforce standards, but again, use LLMs for verification. That's the key thing here, right? One of the areas I'm very excited is to scale risk management. Right? Risk management in most organizations doesn't work. It doesn't work because the graph is not connected. And also we can't translate. What I like is the idea that when you're briefing a board or senior execs or everything, we now have the power to create one-to-one briefings who are targeted to the individual, their culture, their knowledge, their language, the questions they have, and more important, the state that they had, so we can continue where they left behind. That's massive. Right? I don't have the ability to do that today. I cannot do that to my senior execs. In fact, I could do that, but then my team would not be anything but doing reports, right? Or me, right? So we don't scale this today. I think we're very close to scaling this. And this is awesome from a security point of view. This will completely revolutionize risk and allow us to finally go to every single team, every single person saying, why are you doing that? Like literally, why are you doing that? And have context and know that you're doing this project because you want to reduce this risk, who has these stakeholders, that's connected to this, to that budget, and that's why we do things, right? And now it'll be massive because we become so much more productive. So then we know, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do this. And I have why, and I have fact-based decisions, right? I think that's massive. Now, the thing about this is that there's always this thing of it's not perfect. You're going to have mistakes. You're going to do all these things. You see, when you have a feedback loop, it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to have a flow. So once you have a beginning to end, right, then the human ownership, don't worry, they will verify it. If you say you own everything that comes out of this, that person will take personal responsibility for what come out of it. And then they say, oh, it's wrong. You customize the prompts. You fix this. You do that. Now, if this is to do with software, it's hard and it's expensive, right? Or if it's a human person, this is expensive to do. With this, at least we start to leave behind the prompts. We start to leave behind the bias and the fix of all that, which is really cool, right? So there's this great, actually, Trevor Noah, which is one of the comedians, he's actually a really clever guy, right? He had one of the most interesting views I heard of bias. Because what he said, and this is a great interview, by the way, but he says, it's actually a hopeful story because if you have an AI model that is biased, and they all have a bias of some degree, right? But if you can find it, we can fix it, right? The problem with humans' bias is very hard to fix them, right? So in a weird way, yes, in fact, bias is a feature, right, in a way of the models. What you want to make sure is the bias is aligned what you expect it to be biased off, right? But I think the fact that we can tweak the models is actually super important. And in fact, one slide that is missing from here that I need to add is that you need to commoditize the actual models itself. So I was having a great chat with the guys over there who did a presentation about the models. I think, again, part of the future is that you want to support all the models when you do stuff. So you want to be in a case where you commoditize basically the, ChatGPT, Bard, Claude 2, Titan, etc. So you almost want to not be dependent on them. And that's why the prompt context is so powerful, because you don't need to train the model. You do everything on the prompt level. And then what you have is very good models. In fact, I think we're going to get to the point where you want models with no content. You just want models that understand logic. So you know that if the content's not there, you can't hallucinate, right? Because it has nothing to hallucinate to, right? So I think that would be quite cool, right? Now, this is something that eventually I can see us doing. So one of the tricks I use as a CISO, and I highly recommend you guys to do that, is I take P3 incidents and I run them as P1s. So what that means is that, for example, if a customer reports as fraud, and you can argue that, well, the first question people ask is, what's the fraud amount, right? So you would say the P level of that fraud depends on the level of the cost, right? Or how many customers. My argument is different. I say, if the customer reported to us, we failed 10 things. And that's a major incident. Because we failed on detection, on prevention, understanding the signals. We should know already that the customer is compromised if we're doing our job correctly, and then we can prevent it. So that's why I take half of my team and I run them in the incident. And what we do in incidents, we fix things, we build things. We don't do post-mortems, we do everything in the incident. And what we do, we are 10x productive. I guarantee you. We have incidents that, we had an incident that lasted 2 weeks. We asked the team how long would have taken us to do that if we had no incidents. They were like 3 to 6 months. We had incidents that lasted a day or two. We did more in a day or two than we would have done in 2 weeks. Why? Because there's an alignment of effort, right? You can get a lot of stuff done, but you need to put a lot of resources, right, on it. So that's the same thing. Once you have this, and the human ownership goes, whoa, something's wrong with the model, that's a major incident. Because you need the resources and the team and the talent to be able to look at it, trigger the incident, customize the prompts, and then go back into eventually it's normalized. And if you do this, you become good at customization, right? But you make sure that you have very low tolerance for hallucinations, right? And I think that's how you scale at this level, right? Again, we're going to have bots talking to bots. That's the future. I think dynamic things are covered. I think instant response, we're going to get a lot of speed on the back of this. And I think it's going to be finally, we're going to connect a lot of dots, right? How many people have Splunks and SIMs and all that jazz that barely, again, even data into it, right? Is really bad. But again, how we process a lot of that data, and Google does some really cool stuff, and Microsoft doing some really cool stuff around there. So I think it's powerful. I think we're going to be able to clean our data a lot more. And I think that's absolutely critical. And I think we will start to tackle explainability. And remember that when people talk about the LLMs don't have explainability, we don't have explainability for what we do already, right? I challenge you to pick any piece of software in your business and have somebody who can actually explain to you how it really works, right? Because most likely the people that know left the business, there's some documentation left behind, right? Even things internally, you don't have a good explainability how the business actually operates, right? So again, I think we can tackle this. And then, again, I talk about this. And I had a talk, I talk about incidents, how to drive it. So I don't think I have a lot of time. So just one more little thing is I'm playing around with, this in practice. So I'm kind of playing around with creating a bot for understanding, for board members to understand security, right? And that's the cyber boardroom. You can play with it. And what I want to just quickly show you is that you can come to this bot and you can say hello, and it says hello. So try to help you. Right? It's really friendly. What I want to show you is that the main MVP initially is literally this is the prompt, right? So this is the thing you need to understand. To create a customized bot, this is all you need. Right? You say, you're the cyberboard advisor, call it the name, you helpful creator, you're created by this, you're kind. So for example, I made a version that says you highly jaded and skeptical cybersecurity, and the first answer was, hey, welcome to another episode of Let's Not Get Hacked Today, right? So, which is really cool, right? So I think some people love that, right? I think sometimes you want a bit of humor in the middle of things. And again, this goes down to absolutely this slide, which I think is the most important one, is customizing it to you. And I think that's the power that we have with LLMs, is you can customize it to you individually, not, in this case, not just the board members, but everybody in the company. And I think that's my time. Yes. So thank you.